one of my favorite Pesach songs. The time is coming. It is soon upon us. Let the anxiety begin. Here we are. We are in the weeks just before Passover. Nobody likes to think about it until Purim has passed us, right? Like that's a great and consciousness shaping holiday all on its own. So also it's the exact opposite energy. It's like go wild, be messy, get crazy, lose your sense of right and wrong a little bit, lose your sense of what is in the world. And Passover is just the opposite. It's get everything in order, and focus and become clear on exactly what is right and wrong in the world, right? So it's a very different consciousness. And so Purim leaves us, and now we're in Passover consciousness. And actually the idea is that we begin preparing for Passover. It requires preparation. The legal codes tell us that we should begin preparing 30 days before Passover. So that's why I say we actually wait until after Purim. We don't get into it until we have no choice. But here we are. We're preparing for Passover, and we are well timed in this class. We happen to be in our cycle of learning, looking at Mishnah Pesachim. This is a Mishnah class. Mishnah Pesachim is the volume of the Mishnah, the first great rabbinic code that deals with Passover, and we've been dealing with Passover. We've already been talking about it. We had I think 5 sessions just discussing chametz, the search for chametz, the destruction of chametz, the symbolism of chametz. It turned out that chametz is a huge topic that allows us to really think about the spiritual significance of what it means to well. We've talked about it. I'll leave it right there. We talked about, check out our last few classes, but chametz has deep spiritual symbolic meaning for our people, chametz and then matzah. And so we really took our time, as you are supposed to do in this form of study in the Mishnah, and we spent time with chametz. We really examined our relationship to chametz, and that just took us through the first couple of chapters of Mishnah Pesachim, which is 10 chapters long. Now, let me just say with some pain in my heart that next week's class will be our last Mishnah class until we pick up again in the fall. And that is because I am finishing my tenure here at IKAR. I am continuing these online classes. So stay tuned for more Mishnah in the fall, but I'm finishing my job and I have a couple months between this job and my next job, so I need a little breather. The good news for those of you who tune in at lunchtime is that my Thursday classes I'm going to keep up even during my break. We'll probably take a month off during the summer from even those, but my Thursday Parsha classes we're going to continue. But these Mishnah Mondays, they came about during the pandemic, and then when we kind of got back into life, we stopped them for a while, and then people missed Mishnah, and I missed Mishnah, and so we came back to Mishnah last fall, and we've been studying it since the fall. And that kind of took us to where we're at right now. But we're going to do this class and next week's class, and then we're going to take a Mishnah class is going to come to another extended hiatus. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this run. And I'm going to miss teaching, and I look forward to teaching Mishnah again in the fall. Okay, but this could not be a better place to find ourselves in the Mishnah in these weeks before Passover. And frankly, this is just a great last couple of classes to happen to teach in this exploration that we've been doing of the Mishnah. Again, the Mishnah, for those who haven't heard it before, is the record that Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, one of our great sages, wrote down to as sort of cliff notes, so that we could remember the tradition. And by the tradition, I mean the oral Torah. We have this idea that there's a written Torah, and then there's a tradition of oral Torah, of a tradition that was passed down orally and supposed to be passed down orally. And then in the beginning of the Great Exile, after the destruction of the temple, there grew a fear that we were going to lose the oral tradition. And so at a certain point, we did the unthinkable, which is to write the oral tradition down. But we wrote it down, or not we, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi wrote it down in such a way, because after all, it's a whole tradition, it had to be cliff notes. And some would say that the oral tradition is written down not just in fragmented kind of like little reminders, little notes, not just in fragmentary form, but actually that it was written down in a deliberately cryptic and opaque fashion. Because even in the writing of the Mishnah, which was a painful thing for us to have to do, we didn't want to lose that sense of needing to be in dialogue in order to understand the tradition. What do I mean by that? The idea of the oral Torah, the idea that we should have a part of this tradition that isn't written down, it has great meaning for us, but the most basic meaning is that this is a tradition that must be passed on through dialogue, through communication, through conversation, through instruction, through teaching. That's a fundamental principle, which at a certain point we felt we had to violate by writing down the things which had so far been communicated orally. But again, many have posited that no, even in the writing down, it was written. The Talmud, the Mishnah, they are these very difficult and elliptical and confusing documents, and many have suggested that it's supposed to be that way because we're supposed to have to talk through this. So yes, this will keep us from forgetting the tradition, these little crib notes, but they won't stop us from needing to engage in that kind of oral dialogue that we're hoping continues to be a part of what this whole tradition is. Now, I say that for I say all that introduction for two reasons. One, because that dialogue, that oral instruction is precisely what Passover is all about. That idea that something must be communicated by speaking it out, that's the theme of Passover, or at least the theme of Passover night, the Haggadah. So we're in a certain sense, we're right in the heart of what the Mishnah is all about, the oral tradition is all about, to a certain extent, what the tradition is all about, insofar as we can speak of it as a tradition that is passed down. So Passover is the very beginning and the very embodiment of that idea of telling it over, right? Haggadah means telling it over. So this subject matter is is a great way to end our cycle of study on the Mishnah, because this is what the Mishnah is all about, is trying to engage us in a telling and retelling of this tradition so that we can continue to pass it on. And so this chapter, the 10th chapter of Mishnah Pesachim, is one of the most famous chapters in all of the Mishnah, in all of the Talmud. In this time, in this month before Passover, in yeshivas all over the world, they are often studying this chapter, which is known as Arvei Pesachim, on Passover evenings. Arvei Pesachim, we'll see that language soon. And so it's a classic. It's worth looking at just as a legendary piece of Jewish literature. And I'm also suggesting that it's a perfectly emblematic example of what the Mishnah is all about. And one last thing before we dive in, it's also classically Mishnaic in the sense that I was just referring to, this theory that the Mishnah is purposefully cryptic and opaque. This chapter is certainly those things. It is difficult to understand, and one gets the sense that it is meant to be difficult to understand. Okay, that we are meant to look at this and not quite know what's going on, and to have to figure it out for ourselves, right? So what we're going to do, what this chapter requires us to do, is to begin to get into the work of figuring out what all of this is that we are inheriting, and how to lay it out in some kind of order, right? Some kind of seder. And then, of course, that's what chapter 10 of Mishnah Pesachim is. It is the beginning, the origin, the first real clear sense we get of the Passover Seder, okay? So that is what we're going to do for these next two sessions, is to try to look into this. It's like finding the manuscript, where it's like finding the earliest version of a thing that now is so standard and familiar to us, the Haggadah, the Passover Haggadah. We read it every year. It's like one of the kind of hallmarks of Jewish life and practice and literature, because there's a little booklet. The booklet itself is famously cryptic and confusing, but here we're going to get the very first of fragments. That's kind of the earliest record of what will become the Passover Seder and the Haggadah. Okay, so these are really, really valuable. We're just in some ways going to do nothing but just kind of read carefully through them and try to understand all of these pieces. And as we do so, we'll see the beginnings of the Passover Seder just coming into being, coming into life. Okay, so I hope you find that prospect as exciting as I do. Okay. What else before we say a blessing? I think Vera has put in into the chat some of she was kind enough to put in a link to my book, but also wanted to just highlight our podcast. Vera and I and Ben Cooley put out a podcast called Best Book Ever, and our recent episode was in conversation with Channing Nicholas, an astrologer, and we talked about the astrology of the Ibn Ezra. So Vera, are you still with us? If you are, maybe you can drop that into the chat as well. And I recommend it to you. The astrology of the Ibn Ezra, I'll just say this is a total aside, but yes, I'm promoting this podcast, but the astrology of the Ibn Ezra is relevant to even our topic today, because the Ibn Ezra, one of the great commentators on the Torah, brings his astrological wisdom in all over the place. And one of the places that he brings it in is in discussing the significance of the Passover lamb, and the way that the Passover lamb may be a kind of an allusion to one of the astrological signs, right? Aries, I guess. Channy's the expert on this podcast. I'm no astrological expert, but I hope you get a chance to check it out. Okay, let's take a breath and a blessing, and then we'll get into our study today. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so the Haggadah, where does it begin? And I am telling you, suggesting that we're going to see the earliest origins of the Haggadah here in the Mishnah, in Mishnah Pesachim chapter 10, but to a certain extent, the origins of the Haggadah are right there in the Torah itself, in the book of Exodus, and we will in this session especially be looking at where in the Torah the rabbis are drawing from in order to build or suggest or I don't know what verb to use, because some would say that the rabbis are kind of creating an institution from the structure given to them by the Torah, and some would say no, they're deriving that institution's already suggested by the Torah. So we'll make those judgments ourselves as we move forward. But surely, yes, there is some form of Haggadah in the Torah. Here's a source sheet, and the very language of Haggadah comes from the Torah. So let's just take a look at where the mitzvah to tell the story is. It's in Exodus chapter 13, Parshat Bo. Even as they're leaving Egypt, right? Even as they haven't left Egypt yet, already the Torah is saying, and you shall explain to your child on that day. You shall explain. And here I would probably turn this to tell your child, because lahagid is the verb here. Oops, sure, I'll make it public. V'higadata levincha, and you shall tell this story to your child. There's that language of Haggadah. Okay, so to tell, and you shall tell your child on that day. It is but because of what Hashem did for me when I went free from Egypt. Okay, and very famously, the four children section of the Haggadah is playing with exactly these and other verses. There are actually 4 places in the Torah where we speak about telling the story, and that becomes Dibrat Torah Keneged Arba Banim Dibrat Torah. The Torah speaks about 4 children. Oh, those 4 places must mean 4 different kids with 4 different kinds of questions, with 4 different approaches, with 4 different minds, and that's a good example of what I've already been saying, which is that the rabbis are carefully looking at the Torah and saying, okay, so there must be 4 children. Right? That's not explicit in the Torah, but it's there in the structure, in the pattern that the rabbis are spotting in the Torah. And so that's one example. And this verse, V'higadat levincha, is the one that's most. This one is where the actual mitzvah comes from. This is the one where the language of Haggadah is actually used. Okay, so the Haggadah, the idea of the Haggadah goes all the way back to the Torah, and let's note, and we should say this every year and remind ourselves, the telling of the story, the Haggadah of Pesach, is for children. And we not have children, and the tradition tells us if we don't have children, we tell the story to ourselves, right, or to our partners, but we imagine ourselves to be the child receiving from the earlier generation, right? It's not about reproduction. It's about the procession of time and of generations. So it's about passing it on to someone who doesn't yet know, right? She'eno yodei lishol, doesn't yet even know how to ask sometimes. Okay, so that notion, that central notion, goes all the way back to the Torah. But what do you tell them? What is going to happen on that day? Because the Torah, the language of the Torah, is not in any of its 4 places so very clear. it says that we should tell them what happened, and what happened seems to be something related to going free from Egypt. But what do we tell them? Do we tell them the story of the entire Exodus? Do we tell them, I don't know, everything since? The whole story of the Torah? Well, how do we tell this story? What do we do? And that's what Mishnah Pesachim is going to take up and begin to formulate in its kind of strange and fascinating way that eventually becomes our Haggadah. So let's now take a look at the first Mishnah, the opening move of this very famous chapter. So let's take a look now at Arvei Pesachim, and we'll study, I think, the first few today, and then we'll try to study the second half of the chapter next week. I will say, we're going to leave off today probably feeling, because it is kind of a two-part series, this last learning that we're doing together. We may leave today feeling a little unfinished, because we're not even going to get into next week. We're really going to talk about the telling of the story. This week, we're just going to be dealing with the setting of the scene. Literally, there's a setting that needs to take place. In this case, the setting also of a table. Okay, so let's take a look at how we begin before we even start telling the story. Arvei Pesachim. Lots of ink spilled on why the language is in the plural. On the eve, it says here in the English, on the eve of Passover, but really it's on the evenings of Passovers. Okay, so, you could say that every Passover evening, every year, for everybody. We're not entirely sure why it's Arvei Pesachim, but that's the famous opening. And I will just remind us that that the Mishnah opened in the search for chametz with or la'arba'asar. So the Mishnah began with the evening before. That is the evening before Passover when we did the search for the chametz. And it's like we've been moving now for 9 chapters through 9 out of 10 chapters of the Passover volume of the Mishnah are about the preparation for Passover. Think about that. We spent a lot of time talking about getting rid of chametz. A lot of the subsequent chapters are about the cooking of the Passover lamb, which is a big part of it and has to take place before Passover. So lots of talk about how we grill it and how that's supposed to be done and who does it. And there's a lot to see in there, but we're jumping all the way to the end. It's only in this 10th chapter that we actually start to sit down, and we haven't even sat down yet to eat. So let's begin to sit down on the evenings of Passovers, adjacent to mincha time. So when it gets to halfway through the day, mincha is the afternoon prayer, samuch la mincha. So once you get close to the afternoon, lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. A person may not eat until it gets dark. Okay. Now, we usually do it even earlier, but think about this as just as a basic formulation. By the time it's afternoon, first thing we learn, you have to stop eating and don't eat until it gets dark. Why? Does anyone know the answer? Because there's a very specific answer given by the tradition. Why? And nobody likes to raise their hand on a Zoom for a gimme answer. And the answer is, but Yael will do it. Thank you, Yael. What is the answer?
So the taste of matzah is very pronounced on your tongue.
Beautiful, great. So I like the way Yael said it better than I was going to say, which is just so that you have an appetite, right? So that you have what the tradition calls te'avon, some desire to eat what's in front of you on the Seder table. Okay, and Yael puts it more beautifully, so that the taste of matzah will be how did you say it, Yael? Was kind of full and
pronounced on your
pronounced tongue. Beautifully. That's actually very Passover language, so very nice. Pronounced on your tongue. Okay, so part of what it means to get ready for the Seder is to get yourself hungry. Get yourself hungry so that you desire what you're going to eat. All right, that's just as a principle in itself, that's important. We actually see that on Shabbat as well. Some of the laws of Shabbat: don't eat so close to sundown because it's important to come to the Seder table hungry. Now, you might say, wait a minute, that actually it's not such a good idea because I'm just gonna be 2 hours before I eat. We'll deal with that eventually. But that's the idea. You come there hungry. Okay. Now, that was one point. We're going to see 3 points made in this Mishnah, and then we're going to try and see if they all are they're all taught in one Mishnah. So are they all suggesting something, some kind of experience to us? Let's take a look at the next point. So we got to be hungry before the Passover Seder. Next point. Afilu ani shebi Yisrael, even the poorest of Jews, even a poor person in Israel. So even the poorest of Jews, lo yochal, should not eat, and here I'm inserting, should not eat the meal on Passover night, ad sheyaseh, until he reclines. Reclines. Okay. Now, there's a lot going on here, but let's just start with reclining because it's familiar to us. What's the reclining there? Yeah, Elizabeth?
I think a lot of it has to do with we're the opposite of slaves. We are free. We can relax. We can enjoy. This is part of the commandment of this meal is exactly that we are free people and really partake and be meaningfully in the meal.
Good. Okay, great. That's beautifully put. And Elizabeth describes exactly right the symbolism of leaning on during the Passover meal. And we do it when we drink our cups of wine. We lean. Okay. Why do we lean? The symbolism is she should be like royalty. Should be like we're bnei chorin, completely free, and not just free, but elevated so that we have a mansion and servants and people are serving us, even though the truth is we're serving each other. Right? Now, that's important, and the symbolism is exactly as Elizabeth said, but let's just note that now already we have a little bit of tension going on. We have we have two poles here that now suddenly are charging us, so to speak. And one is that we are going to feel rich, we are going to feel free, we're going to feel at ease. But the other is that even the poorest is going to try to feel that way, right? So, and this theme is going to continue in the next point that the Mishnah is going to make. But just notice that there's in this opening Mishnah, there's a desire to feel luxuriant, and yet there is a recognition that some of us are not coming from that experience, right? And even think about the fact that we're going to enter this meal, we've been told we're going to enter this meal hungry, right? Think about the announcement, let all who are hungry come and eat. Right? Well, hungry has a meaning too. It isn't just so that you have an appetite. It's also, there's something about, well, okay, let me not just talk vaguely through it. Let me show you the last part of the Mishnah so that you see that actually we're dealing with a theme here, and then we'll open it up and see what we all make of this theme. But here is the last part of this Mishnah. And one should not be given less than 4 cups of wine. This is a funny way to put it. Lo yifchatu lo, don't give him any less. Arba kosot, him, maybe the poor person. It's a funny phrasing, and who's doing we'll talk about this more as we go, but it seems the Mishnah is written in this way that's like, there's a subject who is going to be doing consuming and sitting, but we're speaking about the subject in the third person, and other people are doing things or bringing things to this subject. Okay, 4 cups of wine. We'll talk about that in a second. Hold on 4 cups of wine, but nobody should be given less than 4 cups of wine, even if afilu mina tamchui, even if it has to come from the charity fund. Okay, not a simple thing to have 4 cups of wine in the ancient world. Not an obvious thing that you would have access to 4 cups of wine. So maybe you will need to receive funding in order to be able to purchase your 4 cups of wine. Or maybe we as a community will need to take from the communal fund, because that's really what the tamchui is, in order to be able to provide the poor among us with 4 cups of wine. Okay, so I think you see now that there's something going on here in this Mishnah. I want to try and think for a moment about what it is. This is the opening of our Seder conversation, our Seder planning in the Mishnah. And we began by saying in the afternoon, stop eating. Okay, so, it's midday. We're already preparing for the Seder. And the other the points that the Mishnah makes are also about getting ready. Don't eat until you're physically ready, you're reclining, and make sure you have everything you need. We're going to talk about that more, having everything you need. But the basics are 4 cups of wine, and you got to make sure you have everything you need. And we're thinking about what's going to happen if you don't have everything you need. If you're not a person who is completely free, economically free and empowered. Okay, so let's just think about this a little bit, about the theme that we're noticing here of the poor person, the hungry person, the charity fund, and all of our sort of pronounced, as Yael would say, mention of this person, even as we are summoning the idea of freedom and relaxation and luxury. Okay, so what do you see happening here in that tension? Can I turn to Matt? Matt, are you good to go on this? Matt Silverstein?
Yes. I think one of the things is that this is a thing of everybody, not individual, that this is drawing us all together in this. And I wonder, the problem I have a problem with all of this because it conflicts with Exodus 12, with the other Seder description. But that does say, if you don't have this, go and make sure you get it. So there is expansive is the word coming to mind, but not really what I mean, an inclusive notion here, that this isn't individual. And so we've got to, because everybody left. One assumes that we're better off slaves and worse off slaves. That is how slavery works too. So.
Good. Okay, good. So Matt is, first of all, just speaking to the theme of inclusion, of a whole community, total communal participation. And this experience is essential. It is maybe the most essential or foundational Jewish practice. So all of us have to be involved. So some of it is just making sure, just to think about accessibility in the way that we might talk about accessibility in our Jewish communities, who needs support in order to have full access. Okay. And Matt says that goes all the way back. Matt, where are you referring to in chapter 12? What were you were alluding to chapter 12 and how even there you can see that there's some kind of.
I've got it in front of me. And should a household be too small to have a lamb, it must take together with its neighbor who is close to its house.
Good.
It's
there it is.
chapter 12. 4. Yeah, the whole chapter 12 is just a whole different Seder.
That's right.
And I'm hoping that the parts of the Mishnah we skipped deals with that. I'm assuming that it is considered. I just don't know that consideration.
Okay. I so appreciate. I wanted to highlight what Matt is doing, because that's exactly the work that we're going to try to do. Matt's doing some very rabbinic work right now for us, which is suggesting that if you ask the question, where are they coming up with this stuff? The first place to look is in the Torah, is to wonder if they are drawing from the Torah a certain sensibility, or is this just a new idea, new institution? And Matt points out that there is already in the the earliest descriptions of Passover in chapter 12 in Exodus, some idea that we have to make sure that every household has enough. Okay, so that's just really excellent work in seeing where the rabbis are getting these notions, these ideas. Because let's be clear, some of this stuff that we are going to read is not in the Torah. The idea that we recline, you will not find that anywhere in the Torah. That's not a biblical commandment, but it is. It's a theme that the rabbis are choosing a symbol for, and the theme, of course, of freedom is in the Torah, but sometimes the imagery or the practice that we're drawing from the Torah is more direct, and sometimes it's somewhere in the middle. And I think Matt identified one that's somewhere in the middle. This idea that households should share, we should make sure that every household has enough. That's already there in the Torah. So well done there. All right, let's turn to Yonatan.
I want to speak to the fact that I think to a lot of progressive Jews, talking about this as a value statement and a concept is very powerful, but this is also really practical. When the rabbis put something like this into the Mishnah, I mean, if you live in an Orthodox community, when you have commandments like this that individuals are bound to receive or in need of, from a very practical perspective, they will have this stuff, right? Like the community will raise the money to make sure that every person in the community has 4 cups of wine if needed, no questions asked. And it's a very, I think this is an impressive and robust communal structure, which I struggle a little bit with, like how the first point fits into the second two. Like the second and third points, clearly there's an idea of here's the communal obligation to make sure that every person has access to this holiday. But I think conversely, the only way that I can make sense of the first point is before you can give other people access who may lack it, you actually need to put yourself into a position that you want access and don't have it. Right, like you need to be hungry and not have the food, and that's when you go, oh, wait, okay, well, this is what it's like to be hungry, and here's how, like, here's the value of getting other people.
Good. I agree with that. I think that's very sharp and exactly right. We've mentioned the poor in some way twice in one quick Mishnah, which was making 3 points. So, what did the first point have to do with that? Were they related? And Yonatan suggests, and I think, and I think he's exactly right, or at least this resonates with me, that the poor, we're thinking about the even the poorest of Jews reclines. Everybody will have what they need, and so we're trying to make sure that those who don't have wealth or access can move into that space during at least the Passover Seder. And with that consciousness in mind, I think it seems significant that we who do, or the addressee of the Mishnah who is doing the preparing, puts themselves into a state of hunger in order to, yes, experience the distinct taste of matzah, to appreciate the matzah, to just be able to be hungry for a meal in a way that we do on Shabbat too, just so we can enjoy it. But also, I think, so that, remember I said, let all who are hungry come and eat, so that we also become poor, right? The rich becomes poor and the poor becomes rich, so that everybody can have the experience of moving from poverty into wealth, from not having to having, because that's the journey, that's the movement. We are all coming from a place of poverty, of slavery, of oppression. And some of us need to remind ourselves what that is like, and some of us need a little help getting all the way there. Okay, so I think you see that tension that is being formed by these two characters, these two experiences that the Mishnah is alluding to. Okay, great. Let's move forward now a little bit, and our work today is going to be mostly dealing with the stuff that you need in order to where you could draw from that charity fund if you need to, but you need to have certain stuff in order to get this ritual going, to get this Seder going. And the first thing that we mentioned actually was not matzah. The first thing that we mentioned was wine, right? And we already mentioned a very famous feature of the Passover meal, one that is also seemingly an invention of the rabbis, and that is the 4 cups of wine. 4 cups of wine. Where do we get 4 cups of wine? So let's take a look here at the beginning of the mention of the 4 cups of wine there. Here, given no less than 4 cups of wine, and then we pick up on that here in the second Mishnah, mazgulo kos rishon. I'm keeping the pronoun as it is in the original. Usually, I try to like take out the gender here so we can all just read it as applying to ourselves. In this case, I just leaving it in because I want us to actually just feel the language, because it's almost like they're imagining a scene. There's someone, they pour him the first cup. Who are they? Most of the commentaries suggest that this is alluding to the person leading the Seder, right? But of course, it also means everybody has a cup poured for them. Okay, so they pour him the first cup. And this symbolism, again, like the leaning, is a kind of evoking of royalty. Now, I want to think for a moment about where we're getting these 4 cups from. But let me just finish the Mishnah. There is a piece here that I think will not be that relevant to our discussion today. It's a debate between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, but I do want you to see it because it gives us this. This whole chapter is a classic, and so I want you to see it all, but also gives us a sense of what exactly is going on here. So Beit Shammai, the house of Shammai, say one recites the blessing over the day, and thereafter one recites the blessing over the wine. And Beit Hillel say one recites the blessing over the wine, and then recites the, I think I changed thereafter to then, and I changed he to one. Yeah. Okay. And thereafter, and then recites the blessing over the day. Okay. This gets complicated, and I don't think we have time today to discuss. There's some like conceptual, like almost philosophical, but certainly legal conversation that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel are having. And it runs like this. So do we say Borei Pri Hagafen first? Or do we say Mikadesh Yisrael v'Hazmanim first, right? Do we sanctify the like on Shabbat? Well, think about Shabbat Kiddush if you're familiar with it. Do we say Borei Pri Hagafen first, or do you say Mikadesh et HaShabbat? Which one do we say first? We say Borei Pri Hagafen. We say the wine first, and we go like Beit Hillel. The debate, as it is spoken through in the Talmud, is about whether the day brings about the need for wine, or the wine allows for the possibility of making Kiddush on the day. And that's a somewhat rare, like subtle and rarefied debate. But 2 things. One, our practice is to go like Beit Hillel, which is that we say the blessing over the wine first. And I go through this, first of all, because it's in front of us, but also because there's something about that actually feels very relevant to what we're talking about here. We need the stuff in order to make the day happen. We need the stuff. Without the stuff, the day won't happen. That kind of consciousness, rather than Beit Shammai's consciousness, which is, forget about what we need. Let's start with the principle, and then we'll get what we need. Okay, again, a fairly rarefied debate, but it is relevant here. What's even more relevant, and what's just sort of like the frame for everything that's going on here, is what are we talking about? What is going on? What are we about to do when we make all these blessings? We're talking about Kiddush. Kiddush. And what is the Seder? The word Seder means order. And there is an order to the Seder. What is the first step in that order? What is the first step in the Seder? Kadesh, Kadesh, Kadesh urchatz, right? So actually, just taking through all these technicalities, just to note that, oh, they're beginning the Seder. This is the first step. And so that's why we're talking about wine first, because the first thing you do is you make a blessing over the wine, just like that's the first thing you do on Shabbat and all the other holidays. But on Passover, it's going to be the first of many steps. Okay, 15 steps. Okay, so let's take a look. Kadesh now. Now we have named it. Let's take a look at this concept of 4 cups. Now, some of you probably know where it comes from. There's a very famous midrash, very famous derivation that the Talmud gives us, and it is very much in line with what we've been doing so far. Where in the Torah do we get our Seder all together? Are the rabbis just coming up with this stuff? 4 cups, it's a cool idea. It certainly fits into the general theme of that is one of our Passover mandates, which is to do things that are unusual, manishtana, what is different about this night? So there's 4 cups, that's unusual. But where do we get the idea that there are 4 cups? And here's where we get it from. If you don't know, now you know. Here it is. Say therefore to the Israelite people, this is God talking to Moshe early on. Lechen emor livnei Yisrael, ani Hashem. I am God, I am Hashem. V'hotzeti etchem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim. I will take you out. Hotzeti. I will take you out. Yitziat Mitzrayim. I will take you out from the labors of the Egyptians. Now, God could have stopped here, and this is the idea of the 4 cups. But God continues. V'hitzalti etchem ma'avodatam, and I will save you, hitzalti, from their bondage. V'ga'alti etchem bizroa netuya uvishvatim gdolim, and I will redeem you. Ga'alti, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary chastisements, judgments, shvatim, whatever. That language isn't important. What's important are these 4 verbs, and then there's one more, v'lakachti etchem li la'am, and I will take you to be my people. And the Hasidic tradition and lots of other commentaries make a big deal of that. Well, what about this 5th verb? And I will be your God. Okay, so that seems like, why didn't they have a 5th cup? But they don't. They have 4 cups for 4 verbs. I will take you out, I will save you, I will redeem you, and I will take you to be my people. And you shall know that I am God who freed you from the labors of the Egyptians. And this one is sort of presumed to be the conclusion of all of it. But these 4 verbs are the reason for the 4 cups of wine. Okay, now, cool. I mean, okay, so now we got 4 verbs over there in chapter 6 of Exodus. But does anyone want to give us a little bit of an interpretation of what just happened? Why is it so important to note that there were 4 verbs? There were 4 things God did for them. There are other discussions of what the 4 cups of wine might represent, so I'm open to other suggestions, but this is the classic interpretation, that those 4 verbs tell us that there should be 4 cups of wine. Okay, any thought on why? Any thought on what's going on there with the 4 cups of wine? First time I ever got drunk, right? So I ate that sweet Passover, snuck too much of that sweet Passover wine, right? Okay, I don't see any responses, and I'll just say that I think this is as we look at it, this appears almost like the first Dayenu, right? If you had just taken us out of Egypt, Dayenu, that would have been enough. Okay, but you did, even in Dayenu, we ask this question, what do you mean? It wouldn't make sense to take us out of Egypt, but not save us from the bondage. But this is the first glimpse we have into a certain kind of Passover consciousness that the rabbis are trying to bring to us, which is to parse out all of the different pieces of our redemption, so that we can identify all of the things that had to happen to bring us where we are, to be with God, to be redeemed. And so you can see here, it's important to the rabbis. Why do we get Dayenu all together? Well, this is a good clue. This is a good first instance of the rabbis saying, think of the Exodus as a layered experience, right? Often with Dayenu, we ask, why not just, either be grateful for just the first thing or say, thanks for delivering us into the land of milk and honey. Just take us to the end. But no, it's this way of kind of parsing out every little move, and the 4 cups of wine are doing that. I see Jen has a thought on these 4 cups. Jen?
Right, I have to unmute. If you look at the verbs, these actually, to me, they parallel the story that we're going to get for the next 40 years. Also a story that you would tell about approaching God. Like, you are taken out of the labors, you're taken out of that place of bondage, but you're also saved from the mentality of slavery. You're redeemed in the sense that you're made holy enough to approach God, and then you're taken in by God. Like that seems both like a personal story and the story of the people wandering in the desert and finally getting to Israel, or ascending Mount Sinai, or you can use it for any one of those. Those seem to actually fit to me, rather than the middle 2 seeming a little tossed in.
Fantastic. Jen is like, right. Jen is being the Baal HaSeder here, right? Like, this is Passover Torah. This is like exactly what we do when we sit around the Seder. What is the meaning of the 4 cups? This raises a question, and someone's got a brilliant interpretation. And so you see, like, this is like Passover beginning to happen here. Jen is beginning to lead a Seder for us. But the description that Jen just gave us of these 4 verbs and the way that they describe a kind of a movement, a journey, is, again, we've already talked about this in the first Mishnah, that there's a kind of an awareness that we have to go from mi'avdut lecherut, from slavery into freedom, from not having to having. This crossing over, this movement from a state of lack to a state of having, is one that we're going to be consciously inculcating throughout this entire experience. And these 4 verbs do that for us as well. It's not just random, and it's not just, as I was saying, parsed out. It's also a kind of a movement, a layering that has to happen. One can only get to being with God if one has been, and I love the way Jen put it, freed physically, freed from the mentality, right? There's a progression here. All right, I'm gonna take one more comment, and then we're gonna look at one more Mishnah from Alice.
Okay, so this is a bit of a different direction, and it's not about the number 4 or the progression, but I just wanted to say that the drinking a specific number of cups of wine in tandem altogether is a feature of the Hellenistic banquet, along with the reclining. And it's like, okay, we all have another cup now. We all have another cup now. It contrasts with what happens at Ahasuerus's banquet in the beginning of the Megillah, where the rule of the party was en ones. You don't have to drink now. We don't all have to take another cup. On the other hand, have as much as you want.
That is very okay. So thank you for that. That's a voice and an awareness that's been missing from our conversation so far. And it's important to have that voice in the background. What are the other influences? What are the other sources? What are the other ideas that the rabbis are kind of bringing in as they construct the Seder and the Haggadah for us? And there are Greek influences, and one of them that gets discussed is afikomen. Like what is that? That sounds like a Greek word. What is that? There are various theories on it. I've heard some wild theories on it, actually. We'll talk about that next week. But yes, there are clearly, the Haggadah and the Seder is clearly an institution that those people in their time formed with the awareness and the resources and the customs and the culture that they had, just as we formulate our Jewish rituals, both by drawing from tradition and by incorporating the rhythms and the knowledge of our time. So this sort of thinking is an important a complement to the thinking we're doing today, which is sort of the opposite, internal. Where from the Torah, from the tradition, are we getting these institutions. And Alice is exactly right in saying there is a kind of a merger. There are things that the rabbis are borrowing from in the world around us, and then there are reference points or anchors that they're finding in the tradition, and you can see layers beginning to build the Passover Seder. Okay, so let's just do one more. We have 2 minutes. But you know what? In 2 minutes, I'll read this last Mishnah, so we have a sense of all of the rest of the stuff, and then next week we'll talk about the telling. But here, we talked about wine. Let's also remember the other major items that say they bring it all before him. And that's actually the way the Mishnah is written, and it's very strange. Heviu lefanav. They bring it before him. What do they bring? Commentators say, well, all of the stuff, all of the vegetables, all of the things that we will need. He dips the chazeret before he reaches the dessert of the bread. Now, I have 1 minute left, so I can't spend the 1 hour that would be needed to figure out this phrase. Is one of the, there are people in yeshivas all over the world right now talking about like parperatapat. What does that mean? What does it mean? There are many interpretations. Some people say it refers to the matzah. Some people say it refers to the maror. Some people say it refers to some other dessert-like thing. Is it the charoset? Okay, as I said, the Mishnah is almost deliberately cryptic here. They bring him the stuff. Like we kind of have to, it's meant as a reminder, just notes to tell us what's really going on. But let's just read through it. They bring him the stuff, and then they bring before him matzah, chazeret, and charoset, and 2 cooked dishes. Okay. So even though charoset, which is that like sweet apple-like stuff, is not a mitzvah, there's nothing about charoset that is mentioned in the Torah, but Rabbi Eliezer ben Sadok says, no, it is a mitzvah. It is a mitzvah. And in the temple, they brought before him the body of the Paschal lamb. That sounds very Christian as I formulate it that way, but gufo shel Pasach, right? But okay, I'm almost out of time here, but let me just say all of this, which requires much more unpacking than we're doing right now. But all of this is based on the things they bring him, the things that constitute what you eat during the Seder, is based on a verse in Numbers that discusses the eating of the Passover offering, and actually discusses Pesach Sheni, what you do if you missed the eating of the Passover offering. But along the way, this verse in Numbers says, they shall offer it in the 2nd month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, and they shall eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Okay. Now, this phrase, this is a famous phrase, al matzot umerorim yochluhu. This famous phrase, it is the Paschal lamb, the Pesach, and it seems like we eat it with matzah and maror. Okay. And there is a lot of debate. It's 101, so I'll close with this thought. There is a lot of debate around in the earliest days. I'm talking about Hillel days. What does that mean? Does that mean we have to eat lamb, matzah, and maror as 3 items which represent 3 different things? Or did we just read al matzot umarorim tochlu, that we yochlu, that we eat it with matzah and maror, and so we eat them all together? And that's where you get the famous Hillel sandwich. Right? The idea that, no, we have to eat it all together. And that's also where you get the charoset, which is supposed to be a kind of a like cement-like bonding object, right? And that's part of why that becomes a mitzvah. Also, we need that as well. Now, what is the significance here? Again, we need another hour to discuss this, but we've been talking about containing different experiences, and the experience of lacking, the experience of having, the experience of suffering, the experience of redemption. And there is some question that hangs over the Passover Seder over whether we should, again, parse out and have an awareness of each of those experiences individually, be really clear on all of the features, what it's like to be poor, what it's like to be rich, what it's like to be in bondage, what it's like to be free, or is Passover somehow a sandwich? Are we somehow combining all of those experiences and swallowing the great complexity that was the experience of redemption with all of its features, right? And that's part of what's being debated here. And just note, the debate comes from a verse in the Torah. The verse in the Torah seems like we're supposed to eat it all together. Are we or not? And of course, the answer in Judaism when we ask, is it this or this, is both. It's always both. And we have both of those expressions alluded to in the Seder. So that explains the pieces of food, but also the Hillel sandwich, right? The Zecher LeMikdash. In the days of Hillel, in the days of the temple, he would eat it in this way all together. Anyway, we're out of time, so we'll stop here, but just take a look at where we're going next. It's going to get exciting next week. I hope you come back for our last Mishnah class. They pour him the second cup, and here the child asks the parent. So that's where really the Haggadah begins. And just think of how weird that is, that even in the Mishnah, they're saying, and here is where the child asks the parent. Like, what? Why? How do we know that? We'll talk about that next week. Okay. Thanks, everybody.